On behalf of UP State Chapter, Association of Gynecologic Oncologists of India, we invite and we welcome you all, our chairperson, guest faculty, and all the participants to our monthly academic activity today on 23rd of January 2021. It's indeed a proud moment for me to have our senior and teacher, Dr. Uma Singh, Dr. Saroj Singh, Dr. Kiran Pandey, and Dr. Seema Hakim as a chairperson on one side, and extreme learned and expert in gynec oncologist are guest faculties, Dr. Abraham, Dr. Ranu, Dr. Manas, and Dr. Satinder Kaur with us. The very purpose of this academic activity is to get clear concept for management of gynecological cancer patients. If you manage such patients in right direction, certainly we are going to control these diseases. Of course, not cure, we cannot cure cancer, but to extent we can control such diseases by proper managing the patients. So keeping this in view, we are going to discuss today two cases. First is advanced epithelial ovarian cancer in a postmenopausal lady. And the second case is borderline mucinous ovarian tumor, again in a postmenopausal lady. Both case will be presented by a senior resident of our institute. After each presentation, we are going to have interactive sessions of question and answer so that we all get benefited with the discussions. So with this, I'll end. Thank you. And I'll hand over to Dr. Amrit Gupta for further proceedings.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon to all my respected seniors and the elite dignitaries, my respected guest faculty. It is my proud privilege to welcome and introduce our chairpersons. Welcome, ma'am. And I invite you to be the chairperson for the first case. Next, I invite Professor Saroj Singh, ma'am. Ma'am is head of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, SN Medical College, Agra. And she has worked as principal and dean also there. She's vice president, our UPSC AGOI organization. And I welcome you, ma'am, and invite you to chair the session for first case. Next, we have Professor Kiran Pandey, ma'am. Kiran Pandey, ma'am, is head of the Department of GSVM College, Kanpur. And she is also vice president, AGOI, UPSC AGOI. And we welcome you, ma'am, to chair the second case. And also I welcome Dr. Seema Hakim, last but not the least. And ma'am is head of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. So welcome to everyone. And now I hand over the mic to Saroj Singh, ma'am, for introducing our guest faculty. Thank you, ma'am.
Amrit, just to do a little bit of improvement, I think Dr. Saroj Singh is vice president of UPSC.
Let me, excuse me. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Seema from Aligarh, and may I also request you to make a correction. Ours is a good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for making me a part of this event. Just a little request to make a correction that I am not a HOD. Ours HOD is a rotational post for 3 years. So someone else is HOD. So a humble request to make that correction. And I'm really pleased to be a part of this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here, ma'am. You are the most important pillar of UPSC AGOI. You are secretary of our organization. So welcome you, ma'am. So can I hand over the mic to Saroj Singh ma'am to introduce our faculty now?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Amrit. Good afternoon, everyone. I thank Dr. Anju and team and Dr. Amrit for giving me this opportunity. And before I introduce our guest faculty, I congratulate SGPGI team for choosing particular this topic of advanced ovarian malignancy, the malignancy which is having so high mortality at all the places. And another important thing for which I want to congratulate you, that you have chosen the way that we'll present a case and then we'll discuss, because the interactive session and how the routine we have problems and how we manage, and that is a very good way, so that I think it will be very beneficial session for all of us. So lots of best wishes for a very interactive session. Thank you so much. And now I introduce our guest faculty. So we are so lucky to have so dedicated and so giants in the field of gynec oncology with us. Dr. Abraham P.T., who is with us, and he was past president of AGOI, and he has done a lot of good work in gynec oncology. Thank you so much, Dr. Abraham, for being with us. Our next guest faculty is Dr. Ranu Patni. She is senior consultant in gynae oncology at EHCC Hospital and Prayas Clinic, Jaipur. Very dynamic and dedicated worker for oncology and for menopausal purpose. She has even started the state chapter in Rajasthan and even written a book on current concepts in endometrial cancer. It is a great pleasure to have you, Dr. Ranu Patni, with us. Thank you so much.
Can I now invite and hand over the mic to Professor Kiran Pandey, ma'am, to introduce our next guest faculty, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Amrit, for making me a part of this very important webinar, which is on the ovarian cancer, which is an epidemic now almost in the cancers. We can see so many persons getting it at a young age. Let me introduce Dr. Manas Vishwas. He is Associate Director, Gynae Oncosurgery, presently at Max Institute of Cancer Hospital, New Delhi. A very renowned oncosurgeon, and he is currently Vice President of, as I told you, Association of Gynae Oncology of India. He has done his graduation and post-graduation from Pune, and the fellowship in gynae oncology from Tata Memorial Hospitals, and and also then from he is a visiting consultant at the Mayo Hospital also. Is a vast teaching experience in gynae oncology, had contributed significantly in several books and conferences, numerous national and international publications he has, and it's my pleasure to introduce such eminent gynae oncology surgeons for this conference, and we are waiting to hear him his interactive discussion. Thank you very much, Dr. Amrit.
Now, may I request Dr. Seema Hakim, ma'am, to introduce our next guest faculty, Dr. Satinder Kaur.
I am deeply humbled and pleased to introduce Dr. Satinder Kaur, who is clinical lead and senior consultant gynae oncology at Dharamshila Narayana Super Speciality Hospital, Delhi. She did her fellowship in gynae oncology from prestigious Tata Memorial Hospital. She also did her International Gynae Cancer Society Fellowship in Gynae Oncology from Sydney. She is European. She did her European certification in gynae oncology. So you can see she is qualified gynae oncologist, highly qualified gynae oncologist, I must say. Of course, she is invited faculty in many conferences, and most of us heard she is a very good orator and very good academician, I must say. And she's also an executive committee member of Association of Gynae Oncologists of India. She is founder secretary of North Delhi Gynae Forum. She is also a recipient of Bharat Jyoti Award and Women of Substance Award for her work in gynae oncology. Satinder, you are really a woman of substance, and we all, if given a chance, we will also give you an award for being so qualified and so humble. Over to you, Dr. Amrit.
Thank you, ma'am. Now it is time to start our cases. And I request our I request Dr. Neeraj Agarwal for our first case presentation. Dr. Neeraj, please, I hand over the...
Dr. Amrit, just hang on. I can see Dr. Umar Singh has joined. Okay. So we'd really like to have few words before we start this.
Welcome, ma'am. Welcome, Umar Singh, ma'am.
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to join this important meeting of UPSC Agoy, where as an activity, Anju this time and Amrit have taken up very good idea of doing case presentations and case discussion. And I'm very happy to see friends from Agoy. Dr. Manas is there, Dr. Abraham is there. I can see Dr. Ranu also already there. So it is, I'm sure, going to be a great kind of discussion, and looking forward to hearing all of it. At some times, I may not be actively participating in this because of certain administrative things going on simultaneously, but great to have you all in our state chapter activities.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Just before we start, I also welcome our esteemed humor board members, Professor Pandesan, Professor Neeta Agarwal ma'am, Sushma Agarwal ma'am, Shalini Singh ma'am, and I also see, I think,
Dr. Neeraj. Dr. Neeraj Jain.
Yeah. So can we start
Deepa
with
Kapoor.
Dr. Deepa Kapoor ma'am has also joined here.
So
we start with the case presentation now.
Very good afternoon to all the guest faculty, chairpersons and listeners. And I would like to thank in advance Dr. Anju ma'am and Amrit ma'am for letting me do this presentation. I am Dr. Neeraj Agarwal, senior resident in the Department of Radiotherapy. And along with Dr. Josna, we will present this case. So Mrs. X, 60-year-old multiparous female presented in our OPD with chief complaints of pain abdomen around umbilicus for last 4 months, which was insidious in onset and non-progressive in nature, and it was relieved on mild analgesics. She also presented with abdominal distension for last 4 months. It was also insidious in onset, progressive in nature, no known aggravating or relieving factor, and it was associated with shortness of breath and difficulty in walking. There is no history of any significant comorbidities. She attained menarche at the age of 13 years and menopause at 45 years. She is multiparous, and breastfeeding was done to all children. There is no history of any contraceptive use or any hormonal therapy. The personal history is insignificant, and there is no history of weight loss or loss of appetite. Our peritonicentesis was done in the month of August outside SGPGI, and we'll come to that later. On examination, her general condition was fair. Patient was alert, conscious, and cooperative with an ECOG scale of 2, performance status, diverted. Skin was shiny with a right paramedian scar below umbilicus. There was no palpable mass or hepatosplenomegaly. There was fluid thrill and shifting dullness. On pervaginal examination, there was fullness in the pouch of Douglas, and vague fullness was felt in all the fornices. There was no lymph node palpable either in the bilateral supraclavicular fossa or in the inguinal lymph node area. Thyroid and breast were not remarkable. Again, her blood investigation, chest X-ray, her kidney function given by glomerular filtration rate and echo ejection fraction were normal. Her CA125 in tumor markers, her CA125 was raised, that was 833. Rest CA1999, CEA were normal. The ascitic fluid cytology came out to be positive for malignant cells and was suggestive of epithelial malignancy. The patient first presented in the gastromedicine department, and since this was a gross ascites case with metastasis was suspected, so they got a PET CT done. And in this PET CT, we can see both CT and the PET uptake. So we can see there was non-FDG ascites, gross ascites, without any uptake. And then we can see that there, here on the CT, we can see omental caking, which had a good uptake, 6.08, favoring malignancy. And then we can see bilateral adnexal mass with peripheral enhancement, and which was not separable from ovary. And the SUV value was also 4.38. So based on our clinical history, examination and investigation, a diagnosis of carcinoma ovary with omental deposits with at least stage 3B was made, a provisional diagnosis was made. And the treatment plan was made as neoadjuvant chemotherapy, 3 to 4 cycles platinum doublet, followed by surgery and then by adjuvant therapy. Because of the poor performance status of the patient and low calorie intake, the patient was initially planned for weekly chemotherapy. Patient received 9 cycles of weekly chemotherapy, meaning three cycles, meaning day 1, day 8 and day 15. And after that, the CA-125 value came down to 192. But patient was reluctant to go for surgery post 3 cycles of chemotherapy due to financial constraints, and they needed time. So again, 2 cycles of 3 weekly chemotherapy now was planned because patient the calorie intake improved, the ascites has subsided. So a 3 weekly chemotherapy schedule was followed for 2 cycles. And then the patient was sent for surgical evaluation. At that point, after the chemotherapy, we can see these are the CT images which were present. We can see there was a partial response, not complete response. The omental caking had reduced and the enhancement had partly reduced, but it was still there. Bilateral adnexally, the mass was there, and the patient was sent for surgical evaluation. But patient could not report due to COVID-19 pandemic and presented in the radiotherapy OPD in the month of August 2020 with similar complaints of abdominal distension and pain abdomen. We got a CT done, and the CT was now suggestive of again a gross ascites. The omental caking was there, and we could see bilateral adnexal mass although on this slide, the right adnexal, the left adnexal mass is not very clearly visible, but on the other slides, it was visible. And the CA-125 post lockdown was 449.5. So again, the CA-125 had risen. The patient was again planned for 3 cycles of 3 weekly chemotherapy, since the patient had a good partial response following the same regimen. After these 3 cycles of chemotherapy, now we again got a CT done, and now we can see only a little bit of fat stranding is present where omental caking was there, and there was a left adnexal cystic mass with no enhancement. So it was also a good partial response, and the CA-125 level post this chemo was 34. The patient was then sent for surgery to the gynae oncology department at SGPGI, and now I would request my colleague Dr. Jyotsna to undergo the surgical evaluation portion and the surgery part which was done.
In our department, the patient was examined thoroughly and pre-surgical evaluation was done, and then the patient was taken up for interval debulking surgery. In part of findings, right paramedian incision was given, which was extended supraumbilically. The peritoneum was inflamed, liver and spleen were palpated and were normal. There was extensive omental caking seen, and a soft variegated 4 into 5 centimeter left ovarian mass was present with the adhesions with bowel and the surrounding structures. So decision was taken to perform hysterectomy along with bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy. Omentectomy was done, and the whole sample was sent for histopathology. On histopathology, it came out to be a bilateral serous cyst adenocarcinoma of high grade with lymphovascular invasion along with the involvement of right and left fallopian tube and omental tissue. The pathological staging came out to be PT3B NX. The uterus showed atrophic endometrium and the cervix showed chronic cervicitis with Nabothian follicle.
Thank you,
now
Jyotsna.
I would request Anju ma'am to consider.
Okay. Can we have questions? Okay,
yes.
fine.
Can I ask one question?
Sure, ma'am, sure.
Why wasn't a lymphadenectomy done in this case?
We are going, because in this patient, the CT, I mean, routinely we are not doing, if there's a large lymph nodes, we do take it out, but routinely we don't take it out. That's why we wanted to ask, is it going to make a difference?
Yes.
That is one question we have.
Yeah.
So to begin with, actually, this is a very common scenario that patient used to come with the stent ascites with mass in the adnexa, high CA125, and sometimes with the ascitic tap and a report of carcinoma cells query from ovary. In such cases, can we start NACT on this basis, or should we do a biopsy? So is it acceptable, this part, or we should go for a biopsy for sure? So with us, we have all the four quite expert in this field. So I'd like to ask Dr. Abraham, so, sir, is it okay or is it acceptable to start NACT on the basis of high CA125, FNAC report, and the CT investigation findings? Or should we always do biopsy and then go ahead?
We have to be certain that we are dealing with ovarian cancer. So we have to be very careful in the history, the examination, because sometimes the GI malignancies also may be confused. So, but if you have a cell block and they are willing to, I mean, an IHC is possible on that, then that might be all right. But if there's any confusion, any uncertainty, then a biopsy is probably the best thing. In this particular patient, we were not told about the family history, and also the decision for neoadjuvant chemotherapy. I mean, in our center, we might have gone ahead with primary surgery itself. But anyway, that is debatable. But yes, generally we do a nummental biopsy before starting neoadjuvant chemotherapy, but sometimes we do a cell block on the ascitic fluid.
So, Dr. Abraham, what I could get is, what we did in this case is acceptable, but the ideal thing would be to get a biopsy from the omentum or from ovarian mass.
I didn't see the CEA. Was there a CEA level?
Normal.
CEA was the normal. The family history was not significant, and the performance status of the patient was poor with gross ascites. So the decision was taken for NACT initially.
Okay.
So there were two reasons. Like, one reason was, I mean, in such patients who are poor performance with lot of ascites, patient wants the treatment early, and because of wait list at different diagnostic areas, it is not feasible to always, take them for the biopsies because of the long wait list.
Shalini, Dr. Shalini, please, and please stop your, open your video. We can't see you.
No, video is there.
Can I say a word here?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, unmute yourself and you go ahead.
Yeah, I am unmute. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
So that was one reason, and the other reason in this case was because of the pandemic. A lot of diagnostic procedures were not being carried out at that point of time, and therefore, I mean, not for the pandemic, but later on also. So in our scenario, we do face this problem of wait listing and the patient wanting the treatment as early as possible. And if we are sure that it is behaving like an ovary and it is an advanced ovary, we are not going ahead with the biopsies from the omentum and the ovaries. It becomes difficult situations. I mean, Dr. Anju would agree to it, how difficult it is to get biopsies on all.
Yeah, definitely, Shalini. This is a practical problems, but I think Dr. Abraham wanted to say. I mean, the message should go that ideally we should go ahead with the either cell block or biopsy, but with the ascitic tap cell, malignant cell showing ovarian origin, the CT findings are of clear cut showing the mass C125 we raised. I feel it is acceptable if you start NACT. Dr. Abraham, is it okay?
Also,
Dr.
you must
Manas,
have excluded any GI tumors by, doing an upper GI and a lower GI endoscopy as a part of the investigations before you have labeled it as an ovarian cancer, primary from ovary.
Dr. Manas, is it a mandatory for all the patients or after a certain age?
No, not all. If there is a bilateral adnexal mass involvement, then it's I think in a workup, one should exclude a primary GI if it's a bilateral. So, and of course, just like Dr. Abraham said, that we would always, before starting an NACT, either a cell block or we in our center always do CT or ultrasound guided biopsy and then start the NACT if the patient warrants NACT. That's what we do. But yes, the circumstances are different. COVID pandemic areas are different, situations. But however, since it's being, we are discussing what also should be ideal, we should ensure that there is a diagnosis before chemotherapy.
Yeah, Anju, I think I also agree with both of them. We ideally we go ahead and diagnose before starting NACT, either by guided biopsy or imprint. But COVID is, of course, an exceptional situation. So acceptable on clinical basis, but not an ideal situation.
Sure.
Can I make a comment, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Ranu, Dr. Manas, and Dr. Abraham. Now the next question.
Hello.
Often, because since we are gynecologist and obstetrician both, I think basically I'm focusing this scenario for mainly for the obstetrics and gynecology, not for the hardcore oncologist. Well, many times we do get difficulty in identifying the omental cake and large lymph nodes because of infection or because of metastasis. So I'd like our tumor board member, Dr. Neeraj Jain. He is a consultant in radiology. I want him to just clarify and make us feel how to appreciate these scenario in malignancy cases.
Thank you.
Dr. Neeraj, please.
So first I'll discuss about the scenario of the lymph nodes. So so CT is a kind of morphological, CT will provide the morphological certain features by which we can differentiate between the benign and malignant lymph nodes. The most common criteria used is the size. So if suppose in presence of primary malignancy, if the lymph node is more than 8 mm, or some says if it is more than 10 mm, then it should be considered as a malignant, but it's not an absolute criteria. Then the shape. The malignant lymph nodes have a round shape, while the benign lymph node have an oval shape. The capsule, it's intact in benign lymph node, and there is extracapsular spread, or which can be seen by subtle fat stranding around the lymph nodes in cases of malignant lymph node. The loss of fatty hilum. There is some fatty structure in the center of the lymph node. When the malignant cell infiltrate, this fatty structure is lost, so which leads to the formation of lymph nodes with the loss of fatty hilum. Another thing is a length or the long axis to short axis ratio. If the long axis to short axis ratio is less than 1.5, then also we can suggest this particular lymph node is a malignant lymph node. And the kind of enhancement. The benign lymph node shows a homogeneous, mild to moderate enhancement, while the malignant lymph node shows heterogeneous enhancement or peripheral enhancement in cases of necrosis. And these malignant lymph nodes have a tendency to be grouped together. They are, while the benign lymph nodes, reactive lymph nodes are a discrete lymph node. Although the infective lymph nodes can also show central necrosis, but we have to look for the other signs of infection as well. In case of the omental caking, so the omentum is a structure which is situated between the anti-abdominal wall and the small bowel loops. It hangs from the greater curvature of the stomach. So usually it's a fat containing linear structures. It may have some vessels or some which may appear as a linear foci, but it should not have formation of nodules. So in the initial stage of omental infiltration, you may get subtle fat standing. Like in this case, the second image you can see, there is some fat standing, but still the nodules have not been formed. But still, you can confidently say in presence of primary ovarian malignancy that omentum involvement is there. Now, the next stage, you can see this there are formation of nodules or a conglomerated mass. So this mass is now the omental cake is formed. So this denotes the omental caking formation. So go back to the Dr. Anju ma'am's comment on how to differentiate infective or benign omental caking from the malignant omental caking. It's really difficult to differentiate both of them, but if you get there is certain thing is called as omental line. If you see a line or a thick fibrous band-like structures and encircling the omentum, it's more favor the infective etiology rather than a malignant etiology. So these are certain points by which can help us to differentiate benign from malignant lymph node and the omental caking. Thank you.
I can see Dr. Satinder has posted some comment. Can you unmute yourself, Dr. Satinder, and say what you wanted to share, please?
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to say that if the clear cut, this is with respect to the previous question, that if we have a clear cut idea towards the ovarian, if there's a big ovarian mass, or if the CA125 to CA ratio is more than 25, so this all favors ovarian primary. So in that case, you can just go ahead with the cytology which you have. But as in this case, there were bilateral masses of the similar size, or the ovaries are normal, which happens in many primary peritoneal cases. In those cases, we definitely need a biopsy, or we need to do upper lower GI endoscopy and biopsy and breast examination to rule out that the primary is somewhere else. Also, biopsy will also help in identifying histopathologies which do not respond to chemotherapy, like low-grade serous carcinomas, clear cell carcinoma. So in that case, we would prefer primary surgery as compared to NACT. So it is not always must, but if you have the facility and if you can get it done, it is the best thing. But then it has to point towards the primary ovary, whatever you're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Satinder. Can we have the next question, please? Now, in this case, we saw that we gave the NACT first. Now, what points to take home for the message, the opinion is for upfront surgery versus interval debulking surgery. Can I have this question from our respected guest faculty, Professor Abraham Pedicale, please?
I mean, upfront surgery, if possible, should be done. I mean, it's preferable. But then, we have, certain criteria to select our patients. So we have to be very carefully select, our patients. So we generally go by, we have to know exactly where the disease is. We need to know what the disease is, the histology, and if possible, or if it's pointing towards ovarian, then we have to make sure that we can remove all of it or most of it. So the pelvis can usually be cleared, but if there is, liver parenchymal disease encasing the celiac vessels, or even the gallbladder fossa is some area that we as gynecologists cannot handle. So these are patients where surgical removal may not be possible. Of course, the performance status of the patients' comorbidities, nutritional status, all have to be taken into account. So generally, we do not operate on patients who are ECOG 3 or more. Most of our patients are ECOG 1 or maybe 2. And so early stage, definitely. So up to 3C, where there's, the caking is less than 5 centimeters, or there's not too much of tumor burden, surgery would be preferable. But if stage 4, and very, very, very unusual that we operate on stage 4A or stage 4, where we can remove an umbilical nodule or inguinal node, we might operate. But generally, stage 4, we do not operate. Massive stage 3C, we do not operate. So clinical criteria would be massive ascites, CA125 levels, 5,000, 10,000, very high levels of CA125, serum albumin less than 3. So these are pointers to adjuvant chemotherapy.
Can we have next question, please?
Of course, patients and relatives should be prepared for extensive surgery. I mean, if they're not willing for bowel resection and stoma, then we have to be very careful.
Yeah, I'd just like to add on to something which Dr. Abraham just said. Most of the clinical findings can be corroborated, with the imaging. So we plan well beforehand, like what has been just said. The only thing sometimes we are not sure, which it doesn't get picked up by any of the imaging, is intestinal deposits. Very small intestinal deposits, which are kind of numerous in number. So then, when in doubt, we do resort to a diagnostic laparoscopy. And if we find the intestinal disease is too much, then we definitely don't go ahead and operate. We would withdraw and put the patient on NACT. So that's something which we do. And I think most of the onco centers are doing, because that doesn't get picked up on the imaging.
Yeah, one other big thing is whether there's a retraction of the bowel. If the shortening of the mesentery, sometimes you can make out on the imaging. Or sometimes I just make a small incision and see if I can pull the small bowel out. If I can't pull the small bowel out, I cannot proceed.
Yeah, the role of lymphadenectomy in interval debulking surgery. In this patient, we proceeded without lymphadenectomy. So what is the role and the exact current status in the literature also in the interval debulking surgery, how much important it is, and is it mandatory? Can I request Dr. Ranu to take up this question, please?
Yeah, sure. Actually, in advanced cases, advanced ovarian malignancies, the role of lymphadenectomy is restricted to only enlarged lymph nodes in the form of lymph node debulking. We don't do a systematic lymphadenectomy in advanced cases. And so that is in this case specifically, if there are, the PET CT is not commenting on any, I was about to say that the PET CT hasn't commented on lymph nodes. So if there are any bulky lymph nodes, they have to be debulked, but we don't do a systematic lymphadenectomy in advanced diagnosed ovarian cancer cases.
Dr. Abraham, I think you are having some trial or something for lymph node.
Yes. So yeah, we find that even during interval debulking surgery, 30 to 40% of the nodes have microscopic disease. But whether removal of that will make a difference, we do not know. So we are doing a trial actually with in patients who are having IDS, whether to do nodes or not. So
what is Dr. Manas' take on this aspect?
Yeah. So what has been just said by Dr. Ranu is, of course, based on the Lions trial. But in our center, what we do is that suppose, because it's mentioned as interval cytoreduction, so if in the pre-NACT, in the initial workup, if the nodes had been enlarged, we definitely remove them. If the pelvic nodes were enlarged, we would do a systematic pelvic node dissection. And if there were retroperitoneal nodes which were there on the pre-NACT, PET CT, or on CT, then we would go ahead and do a lymphadenectomy. Rest, yes. And now, as per the Lions trial, if all the disease has been debulked to a CC0 level, that is no macroscopic disease, then one may omit doing a systematic pelvic systematic lymphadenectomy, both pelvic and para-aortic, and the survival, there's no problem, there's no difference in survival.
So in this particular case, she has already received 8 cycles of chemotherapy and she had surgery. So what option she has now? Any of our guest faculty can answer.
If the surgery now has been a CC0 surgery, then the patient needs to be just observed, like after having given chemo, and then a full surgery has been done. So she can be reviewed 3 monthly. That is all till she has a recurrence.
Dr. Anju, what was the interval between the first 5 cycles and the next 3 cycles of chemotherapy? It's
around 6 months.
So, I mean, it is a little debatable whether we consider it as a continuum of treatment or just 3 cycles of chemotherapy, because she has a long gap before the other 3 were given. So that would be a debatable issue. And in that case, since we have given 3 cycles and then performed surgery, she can undergo 3 more adjuvant cycles of chemotherapy.
I think we need to look at the chemotherapy response score, which will be seen on the histopathology. The pathologists usually give chemotherapy response score. Or the response has
no residual, yeah.
So what is the residual tumor in the specimen which has been taken out? If the residual tumor was there, a lot of residual tumor was there in the histopathology specimen, the hysterectomy and omentectomy which has been done, patient still needs more chemotherapy. If there was no disease as such in that histopathology, then yes, we can keep the patient on follow-up.
I think the patient had residual disease, and that is what has been presented. And apart from that, I would like to say that because she had gross disease, she definitely merits the rest 3 cycles of chemotherapy. And the response should be maintained with some kind of maintenance therapy, either in the form of bevacizumab, if the patient can afford, or if the patient can't afford, then people are giving low dose etoposide to maintain the response.
BRCA has been done?
BRCA, because she's elderly, she's 65. So that is why I did not say BRCA, because those positive patients should be given olaparib. But
so we are coming to that, whether there is any role of BRCA germline testing or somatic testing in this case or not.
Yes, there is, because high-grade serous adenocarcinomas, half of them, even if they are not BRCA positive, people are giving it in mismatch repair or homologous deficient. But we are not doing that in our institute. But if the patient turns out to be BRCA positive, then definitely one should give targeted therapy in the form of olaparib.
Could not afford surgery in the first time.
So difficult.
Difficult.
Niraparibs are really out of.
I think this is a big constraint in our scenarios, because affordability is a very big issue for.
Yes.
Yes.
Very true.
And even if we do the genetic testing and patient is not able to afford the therapies, then also there is.
The financial crisis is there always. Yeah, that's true. So can we have our next question? This is basically this. I would like to have input from our pathologist, Dr. Vinita Agrawal. Is she here? Dr. Vinita?
Yeah, I'm there. Yeah.
Vinita is a senior consultant in pathology department at SGPGI. So Vinita, will you, throw some light on this part?
Yeah. So yes, chemotherapy does affect the tumor histology. The effect can be to the tumor itself. So when you look at the tumor cells, or it could be the surrounding parenchyma. So when the chemotherapy related effects include, there may be a lot of atypia in the cells. They may start showing degenerative changes. They may show nuclear changes, cytoplasmic degeneration. And of course, you can also have, as a response to chemotherapy, areas of necrosis. Apart from that, When you look at the chemotherapy effect, the stroma may show fibroinflammatory changes, which are taken into consideration as a chemotherapy response. That is, you look at what is the amount of fibrosis along with tumor, if there is a viable tumor, and also you try to look for the inflammatory changes. The inflammatory changes in the form of the infiltration by macrophages, presence of hemosiderin-laden macrophages, presence of a mixed inflammation. At times, you may even see giant cells associated with the area where the tumor was present. And of course, you may have areas of sclerosis. So there are changes in the tumor per se, there are changes in the surrounding parenchyma, and of course you need to look at the, as Dr. Satyendra talked about, you have to in the omental deposits, the largest omental deposit, you need to see at the chemotherapy response, and then you need to grade it into 1, 2, and 3, depending upon the percentage of viable tumor and the fibroinflammatory response. And accordingly, we need to tell that.
I have one query. Can the changes in the histopathology, which are reviewed at the time after the surgery, can they guide us in the further course of management as to what would be the chemotherapy that would be required, or any other opinion that can be given on that basis?
Okay. Depending, as I said earlier, the chemotherapy response is very important. Depending upon that, you may decide which chemotherapy you would like to give. I'm not sure if we can, as pathologists, tell you which chemotherapy, but of course it will tell you what has been the response of the previous chemotherapy regime that you have given. So whether there is any response or where there is no response, and what is, of course, it is also important to see what is the size of the omental deposit, the largest omental deposit, and if there has been any regression in the size. So gross as well as microscopic features can guide you towards the chemotherapeutic regimen. It has to be extended or the same has to be given.
Vinita, just one more thing. Can you clarify that invasion and deposit? Suppose on the tube, the ovarian mass is invading the tube, but some other tumor is getting deposited. So how will you differentiate between these two?
Yeah, so of course there is of course guidelines to say whether you have to clearly define whether it is an implant or it is a metastasis. For example, for omental deposits or others. So for implants, it is present on the surface, and these surface implants could be just like epithelial presence of epithelial, proliferative epithelial tissue, or it could be desmoplastic where you have a lot of fibrous tissue. But as compared to invasion, where you see small tumor nest invading the parenchyma, and you also have that, when we look at the slide, we see that retraction artifact, that you have spaces around these so-called tumor nest, which can guide us to make a diagnosis of whether these are invasive or not. So that will be an important aspect to look for, whether they are just superficial implants or whether they are really invasive malignancy.
Okay, thank you. Can I have next question? So in this particular case, is there any role of BRCA testing? We already have discussed because of financial issue, even if it is positive and we have started oral PARP inhibitor, very unlikely that in our setup and our society, patients are going to continue this. So
I would still say that BRCA testing should be done because it has an impact on the familial interpretation also. So in case if we can persuade the patient regarding the BRCA testing, it is really good.
Even if they don't get tested, I think they all should go for counseling. Genetic counseling should be done.
Okay.
Yes. And then let them decide whether they want to spend that money or not.
Yeah, a good pedigree planning and seeing that what is the what has been the how much family has been affected by that also can give us some idea. So I think the genetic part should not be neglected, and we should insist on getting these done. So with this, I think we finish this first case. And we come to the second case presentation now. And I would invite Jyotsna Pandey.
To make one point, Anju. I mean, generally, there's no point giving too many cycles of chemotherapy. If you are doing interval debulking, we should operate after 3 to 4 cycles.
Yeah, that's very important, sir. But here, due to pandemic, she didn't come to us. She lost to follow up, and when again came with the disease progression.
All that happens. I mean, sometimes we get 6 cycles outside, and
yeah.
Then, but generally, as a principle, I just wanted to.
Yeah, that's very important.
Not to
thank you, sir.
Too many cycles of chemotherapy.
So next
Dr.
case.
Anju, may I ask one question? Dr. Anju?
Yes.
May I ask one question?
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, for my knowledge, that like supposing you have given like 4 chemotherapy or 3 or completed whatever you wanted, and then there was a gap, and then again chemotherapy has to be started as per your discussion and decision. So they will be considered the fresh, I mean, total will be considered like 4 plus 3, 7, or only 3? What will be considered?
I think Dr. Ranu has answered this. Because after 6 months...
I just wanted to make it more clear. So what I wanted, so you mean to say that they will be only considered as 3? Supposing now we are giving 3.
Yes.
So then if we plan 6, so that means 3 more later on has to be given.
So it depends upon the interval when which has occurred in between the things. Like first you have given 3 cycles, and what was the after, and patient did not come to you or did not take any treatment for 3 or 4 months. Then again assess the patient with a CT scan and CA-125. At this set time, if the patient is operable, please go ahead with the surgery. Like in this case, there was a progression in 6 months. So probably they again gave 3 more cycles. But ideally she should have undergone surgery. Even if there was a gap of 2 or 3 or 4 months, and then adjuvant chemotherapy. Because if you keep on increasing the number of chemo cycles, it is just going to increase the resistance. I mean, this patient was lucky that she received 5 cycles first, and after 6 months, she again responded to that same paclitaxel for 3 cycles. Otherwise, just increasing the number of cycles won't help. So it's finally the surgery, then you can add your additional 3 cycles of chemotherapy.
Dr. Satinder, actually, Madam Kiran Pandey wanted to ask that after 6 months, disease progressed, we gave 3 cycles, okay? Then we did surgery. So this 3 cycle before surgery will be added to the previous one, or we can give
it will be added
3 cycle after surgery.
Yes,
this will be added.
May I make a comment?
I differ.
It will be added.
It won't be added because the patient came with a recurrence.
Yeah.
Can't be added.
6 months have already passed since the last treatment.
Progression. So we are not adding it.
Yeah.
But in case the patient comes after 2 or 3 months gap, so it's not always going to be 6 months, and there is no progression.
So in this case, Satinder, in this case, I think we should go for
the initial ones. We will consider the first. Now the 3 she has received just before the surgery.
Yeah, that's
if it is considered as a residual, then it is added. If it is considered as a recurrence, then it is fresh cycles.
Dr. Manas, in any case, we have to treat her de novo because she has just, I think we can't take into account the first 6 cycles that she had or 5 cycles that she had because she hasn't taken a complete treatment. She has started the treatment after 6 months.
So it's an unusual situation.
Yeah, very unusual.
So it has been unusually treated also.
I think this is
different.
It's a sort of an academic theoretical question. Most important is her chemotherapy toxicity is cumulative. So she might be already having peripheral neuropathy and all that. So
that only
the amount of toxicity that will guide the decision.
Yeah, may I make a comment?
Yeah, Doctor.
In this particular situation, we also need to consider that because of this gap between 2 sessions of chemotherapy, you might have had a clonal selection of a tumor which is different from the original one. So that also needs to be taken into account when you are talking about adding or not adding the chemotherapy sessions.
Okay, that's very important point pointed out, Dr. Pandey.
So should we change the chemotherapy? If you are going, those who want to continue chemotherapy, should we change the chemotherapy?
The chemotherapy medical oncologist they will decide, I think.
No, we usually don't change. Because if the patient has come within 6 months or whatever time, and he has responded to the chemotherapy the second time, that means the patient is a responder. So if the patient is a responder and platin, so he is platin sensitive, and so therefore we give the same chemotherapy. And if the patient didn't respond to the second challenge, then we consider changing the chemotherapy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everybody for solving this.
Now we are...
Anju, before we start next case, before we start next case, I think I should congratulate the entire team for bringing up very practical questions and giving clear messages to the listeners to what exactly to be done in which particular case. Thank you so much.
Nice to hear from you, ma'am. I wanted to... so next case, please, Dr. Jyotsna, go ahead.
My patient, Mrs. Y, 60-year-old, postmenopausal since 6 years, multiparous, referred from Kanpur, presented to gynecological OPD of SGPGI with chief complaints of pain abdomen since 3 months. The pain was off and on, dull aching in nature, and non-radiating type. There was no history of diabetes, hypertension, and tuberculosis. The bladder and bowel habits were normal. There was no family history of breast, colon, endometrial, and ovarian cancer. The patient was worked up in Kanpur and was taken up there for surgery, but due to anesthetic complications of severe bradycardia and hypertension, on operation table, she was deferred, the surgery was deferred and was referred here. The menstrual history, she attained menarche at the age of 11 years, menopause at the age of 54 years. She had 3 children, all by normal vaginal delivery, and the last delivery took back 29 years. She breastfed for 1 year, and there was no history of use of oral contraceptive and ovulation induction. On general examination was fair. She was of average build with BMI of 28 kg per meter square. There was no lymphadenopathy. Breast and thyroid were normal, and all other vital signs were normal. On per abdomen examination, a firm mass was felt on right iliac fossa, which was non-tender with smooth surface, and no other organomegaly was felt. On per speculum examination, cervix appeared healthy and a screening pap smear was taken. On per vaginal examination, there was a large firm mass of 8 cm, which was felt through right and anterior fornix. The mobility of the mass was restricted. It was non-tender and cystic in nature. The left fornix was free and uterus was anteverted and multiparous. In investigation, she came with a transvaginal sonography, which showed a complex multiseptated thick-walled cystic lesion of around 8 into 8 cm on right side. Tumor markers were done. CA125, serum beta-HCG, and serum alpha protein, they were normal. Carcinoembryonic antigen showed a value of 6 nanogram per ml, which was slightly increased. The pap smear came out to be normal. We got the CECT done. It showed a large, multiseptated, thick-walled cystic lesion in the right adnexa of around 9 into 8.5 cm. The planes with the adjacent structure were well maintained, and the left adnexa and uterus were normal. So a provisional diagnosis of ovarian mass, most likely of benign nature, was made. The patient was, pre-surgical evaluation was done, and patient was taken up for surgery. A midline incision was given. A large 10 cm cyst was seen in the right adnexa. Liver, spleen were palpated and were normal. Bowel and omentum appeared normal. The cyst got accidentally ruptured while delivering due to adhesion, and a clear mucinous fluid came out. So the appendix was examined. It was retrocecal, thickened, and edematous. So a decision of total abdominal hysterectomy along with bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy was done. Appendicectomy was done, and infracloac omentectomy was also done. The whole sample was sent for histopathology. Histopathology showed mucinous borderline tumor. The appendix showed chronic appendicitis, and omentum had no omental deposits. I would like ma'am to take up the questions.
Okay. Thank you, Jyotsna. Let me have a question. So in this particular case, the surgery has been done. The histopathology came out to be borderline, but the cyst was ruptured during surgery. So is there any role of adjuvant chemotherapy here? Any of our
what is the exact histopathology?
Chairperson, anyone can answer.
What is the exact histopathology? Whether it is serous or
borderline mucinous cystadenoma.
The cystadenoma is not a malignancy. Is it carcinoma?
Borderline tumor.
Borderline tumor.
Borderline mucinous, borderline tumor.
So the cyst has ruptured in this case, it becomes stage 1C borderline tumor. But there is no role of chemotherapy in borderline tumors until and unless there are invasive implants.
Please be loud. I can't hear.
Hello? Yeah.
So that is right. What has been just said, that there is no role of chemotherapy unless there are invasive implants outside.
Yeah, that's right. I was about to put.
So there is no role.
So Dr. Manas, this mucinous borderline tumor itself, histopathologically, it is probably of two types. One is non-invasive, another is invasive. So
no, but what is the exact pathology? We need to know what all was removed. Was there any implants? What were the Parov findings? Only then we would be, just by a tumor rupture while taking out does not warrant a chemotherapy in borderline tumors. In fact, without tumor rupture, even with implants, if they are non-invasive implants and in mucinous borderline, adjuvant therapy, chemotherapy is not required.
Okay. So here,
yes, I agree with Dr. Manas. If the implants were invasive, you have to, I think, review the histopathology to see whether the implants were invasive or not, and then proceed with the decision of chemotherapy.
Okay, so this case was actually recently we operated. There was no implant, apparently the abdominal organs were normal. So here, the histopathology, I'd like to ask Dr. Vinita this, because they have reported it's borderline mucinous tumor. So is it invasive or not? The atypia is important here. So if it is not non-invasive, then there is no role of chemotherapy. That's what I think we all should take the message.
Borderline is non-invasive itself. It is the implants which could be on omentum or on peritoneal biopsies, which I think peritoneal biopsies have not been mentioned here, whether they have been taken or not. So if there is deposit somewhere else, and then in case of mucinous tumor, that deposit somewhere else which shows some invasion has to be considered as mets in borderline mucinous tumor, and patient will need chemotherapy for that thing. But as such, ovary is showing a borderline tumor, that means it is non-invasive and patient will not need chemotherapy for this case.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Satinder. This has been given as borderline mucinous tumor. So this is not invasive. There is no invasion. It has been given borderline just because there are some proliferative changes in the lining epithelium. There is atypia, there is nuclear stratification, and there is mitosis. However, there is no invasion to suggest any other change which may be like invasive carcinoma, and there are no implants.
Okay, thank you so much. So in this case, we don't need to give any chemotherapy, even it is ruptured. Okay. So this is very clear. Now next case, please, next question. Since in this case, the CEA level was high, and it turned out to be mucinous cyst tumor. So endoscopy was mandatory in pre or post surgery? Did we miss something here? Keeping in CEA value high? No.
Unilateral tumor.
Sorry?
A unilateral tumor, and if other workup, like Dr. Satinder had pointed out, that the ratio of CA125 is to CEA, we need to know that. And if it's a unilateral tumor, we haven't missed anything by not doing an endoscopy.
Okay.
Primaries in the appendix, which will not be picked up on endoscopy.
Satinder, we can't hear you.
Hola.
Yeah, you come. So say again.
मैं चलो बाद में दिखाऊंगी थोड़ी देर में तू जा बल्ले मैं खाऊंगी.
Dr. Satinder.
Yeah. So
उसको बुला ले.
Usually the primary is in appendix, which will not be picked up on this endoscopy. But yes, it is said that in case you get some invasive implants, So then in mucinous borderline tumors, post-op, you should do an endoscopy to rule out some stomach primary or somewhere else, because that is taken as that primary was somewhere else. So, but in this case, since there is no invasive implants, you don't need to do any endoscopy post-procedure also.
Okay. So very clear message. There's no need for pre or post-surgery endoscopy in this particular case. Thank you so much. What would be the next question, Jyotsna? So we already have discussed this rupture doesn't make any change in further management. Am I right? Dr. Satinder or Dr. Manas? Okay, fine.
Yeah, right, but that does not give us next that do it laparoscopically and rupture it. That is just, this was an accidental rupture.
It happens.
In all cases, we have to avoid the rupture.
Yeah, that's true. But it was a little bit adherent. So while delivering it out, it ruptured.
So I'm saying it should not give this message that we can do in laparoscopically all masses and rupture them, because it won't change the management. So it is accidental rupture is always there, especially for endometriosis and all. So our aim is always not to rupture, but yes, definitely this case, it does not change the management.
Probably the chance of recurrence may be increased. So I think surveillance will have to be careful.
The mucinous fluid can, if it is of intestinal type, can give rise to some pseudomyxoma like picture. Yeah, is later on. So follow-up has to be, yes, like Dr. Abraham said.
Okay. So proper vigilance is important in this case to see any recurrence. So I think this is the probably last question. Role of frozen section in this case. While it would not have ruptured, and like, is there, we would have sent the frozen section and report turned out to be borderline. The surgery, what we did, was it different from?
No, the frozen section might have come back as malignant. How do we know? We wouldn't have known whether it's malignant or not.
In this case, sir, if it is frozen, the reports would suppose the reports is borderline. The surgery, because she's 60 years old. So anyway, we have to do hysterectomy, bilateral salpingectomy, and the mass is big. So omentectomy has also been accepted here. And
so Dr. Anju, Dr. Anju, if the frozen section would have come borderline, like you said, the surgery which you have done is adequate in this case. That is what you wanted to know probably. Is the surgery adequate for this 60-year-old lady, PH, BSO, and you have done infracolic omentectomy? If the momentum has been thoroughly analyzed by the pathologist and has said there is no implants, so the surgery is all right in this case at your center.
But the problem is we don't know what the histology is.
The borderline diagnosis on frozen section.
Frozen section should be sent.
Yeah, but frozen section is mandatory in all cases where you are opening up a adnexal mass, and especially in a younger woman. The problem of borderline comes in a younger woman who wants to conserve fertility.
Yes.
Otherwise, in 60-year-old, if you are getting a report, but yes, if it's a malignant report, the whole scenario changes. Then it's not an adequate surgery.
Panas, would you do lymph nodes in malignant mucinous?
No, you don't.
Yes.
Malignant mucinous for early stage, would do it for all staging. Lymph nodes, definitely for early stage, you need to do for staging.
So Dr. Manas, you take out the large lymph nodes or sampling or all lymph nodes?
For early stage, I do systematic lymphadenectomy.
I would go for frozen section.
Para-aortic as well as pelvic lymph nodes. And of course, we do frozen in all cases where we are opening up and we do not know. And primary or staging laparotomies.
Okay. Dr. Ranu, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I would go for frozen section case and proceed according to the frozen section report. In almost the same surgery that you've done, but that would give us a better inclination about the lymphadenectomy part. Frozen section I would go for.
Okay.
Now, what we are talking here is actually retrospective, isn't it? So when you are talking about frozen section, as Dr. Abraham said, you would not know what the tumor is. So you have to send a frozen section to see whether there is invasion or not. So if there is invasion, significant, you have to call it malignant, and then as has been said, the scenario changes.
Yeah.
But
So
here we are talking actually in retrospect. So, but if you are talking prospectively, then obviously you would not know what the tumor is, whether there is invasion or not. So you have to send a frozen section.
Ruptured, still you should send for frozen, because you anyways the pathologist can see the solid component and they'll take a biopsy and rule out invasion in that case. So the anyway, and the diagnosis of borderline making on frozen is, I think, very difficult. The pathologist can comment better on that. So I think whatever you had, the cyst wall also should have, if the facility is available, you should send it for frozen, because they can tell you then at least if there is some invasive component, and you can plan your surgery accordingly.
Dr. Pandey, how it is easy to see? I mean, malignant and benign, it's very easy to see. Frozen section, because frozen section it's not 100%. So is it not difficult to comment on borderline in frozen section? Sir,
so the pathologist is there, but the general problem of borderline is borderline report is given by the pathologist on frozen very much, but it is to be remembered that 30% of almost 30% would be upgraded on a final histopathology report. That is also to be accepted, but rarely there is a problem of benign and borderline. When a pathologist gives borderline, it is usually borderline, or it could be more. But benigns are not hardly ever reported as borderline. It could turn out 30% would be final histopathology would come as malignant, but that has to be accepted.
Yes,
I hope I'm pleasing a pathologist.
No, that's all right. I agree with you. As I said here, the objective is to see whether it is invasive or not. Whether you can have benign, you can have malignant, and you can have a category which is in between, where you would not be sure. Because in this case, it may be defined later as malignant, because you would not have sampled all the areas.
That's right.
You can only sample limited areas in frozen section.
That's why on frozen section, if you get borderline, we have to do full staging.
Absolutely agreed.
Yeah.
At times, the pathologist may just say that it is at least borderline.
Okay. So, Dr. Jyotsna, can we have another question, or if we have done? So this is probably the last. Dr. Pandey, is there any alternative to frozen section? Because many places, I mean, frozen section facilities, even it's not very good in our setup also, but in the periphery and all, frozen section is at many places it's not existing, or even if it is existing, it's not proper functioning. So is there any alternative way to see during operation to take decision, particularly young patients?
Not in this situation, because here the objective is to see invasion. Yes, that sir. You will not be able to see on imprint cytology or FNAC. The alternatives obviously are either intraoperative FNAC, or you can have a specimen from which you can make an imprint smear. So those can be used only to say whether it is a high-grade malignancy or not. But you cannot define invasive based on those cytological techniques. So in this situation, in this particular situation, the alternatives won't work. But if the question is whether we are dealing with a low-grade thing or a high-grade malignancy, then yes, the alternative like imprint cytology or intraoperative FNA may work.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, for your inputs. And at the end, I would like to ask our chairperson also to give their opinion if they wish to give. Dr. Deepa, basically, I want to introduce her. She's colleague. She's working with me in General Hospital. We are working together. Yes, Deepa ji.
And just one question from the experts. Supposing this very same patient, if supposing the appendix was normal, it had ruptured, if we don't have a facility for frozen section, do you think we should proceed with the same surgery, or we should just, because CEA is just borderline high, 5 is our upper limit in our institute and this was 6. So do you think we should proceed with the same surgery, or we should just go ahead with THBSO and leave the patient if the appendix is normal and on examination and the omentum is also normal to appearance?
I think when we cut open the cyst, if it's mucinous fluid, you should probably take the appendix out.
Okay. Even if it is normal looking?
Yes.
Because in this case, it was edematous, so obviously we went ahead with it.
Yeah, no, borderline mucinous and malignant mucinous tumors, we should take the appendix out.
Yes.
Dr. Deepa, in view of mucinous tumor, we did the right thing. And since 60-year-old lady, so omentectomy is also a good surgical effort, because if it would turn out to be borderline or malignancy, then again patient has to go under repeat surgery. With this, we are going to end our second case, and I would like to thank all our team, guest faculties for their valuable input, our Institute Tumor Board consultant for their important inputs, and the chairperson for gracing the occasion. So I'd like to thank all the participants as well for without any event, the participants involvement is utmost important. And I would like to thank our telemedicine department, especially Dr. Ripu, for constant support to us. And so with this, we are going to end our monthly meeting on our society, UPSC Agoi. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you.
See you.
Thank you.
Next, again, as soon as possible in next meeting or so. Dr. Seema, you would like to say something before we are closing?
Yes, yes. Congratulations, Anju and Amrit and your entire team for taking up this important topic of ovarian malignancy. What I want to share, and I want an opinion of experts over here, especially Dr. Abraham, if you can address that issue, that recently we have been witnessing epithelial ovarian cancer cases coming at very young age, right? Coming for infertility treatment and adnexal mass, and we find that they are having epithelial ovarian cancer. So, like, can we do some research in India addressing the epidemiology of epithelial ovarian cancer at multi-center level? And I think with at the platform of Agoi, it is possible to plan such a research on this important issue, that why now we are getting epithelial ovarian cancer at a very young age. Even in adolescents, sometimes we are seeing the cases of epithelial ovarian cancer, and that is what I want to address at this point of time. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's important topic. And we hope this society, our society, along with the national body, we can take up this subject for research.
Yeah, Anju, let's plan this epidemiological study of epithelial
ovarian cancer. Because these tumors in young women may have a different molecular profile, so it would be interesting to look at that. So thank you, everybody.
I think I wanted to see the chat box, but it is full of appreciations and there are no questions there. So I would be I think we have answered most of the questions.
And last but not the least, just I want to share this slide to all of you. This is a slide which is a rangoli made by our staff nurse. You can see on this side, this is a lady with ovarian cancer in a pain and all, and this is the doctor, treating doctor, who is doing all the care and treatment for her, and now she's okay, and she's having you can see the face, the smile on her face. So just
Dr. Anju, it's very beautifully done. Very beautifully. Please congratulate the the person who has done it.
Ovarian tumor,
very, very beautiful.
And
Manju
enigma. This brings us to the remembrances of the 2018 UP Agoy meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.